Abstract. Artificial intelligence is transforming organizational capabilities in talent analytics, enabling real time detection of retention patterns previously obscured by aggregated metrics and delayed feedback cycles. This shift threatens to expose a long-standing organizational blind spot: the localized nature of attrition, engagement decline, and talent development, failures that cluster around individual managers rather than systemic policies. Drawing on research in people analytics, psychological safety, and leadership development, this article examines how AI driven insights will make managerial performance visible in unprecedented ways, creating both accountability pressures and developmental opportunities. We explore evidence based organizational responses, including transparent coaching systems, capability building frameworks, and governance structures that position data as a developmental tool rather than a punitive mechanism. Organizations that proactively address this transition can transform retention from a lagging HR metric into a dynamic leadership development signal, while those that delay face cultural backlash, legal risks, and accelerated talent loss among their strongest performers. Introduction. The enthusiasm surrounding artificial intelligence in human capital management often centers on efficiency gains, predictive hiring, and automated administrative processes. Yet beneath these operational improvements lies a more profound and uncomfortable transformation. AI will make visible what many organizations have long known informally, but rarely addressed systematically. Retention problems, engagement failures, and development bottlenecks are frequently not enterprise wide phenomena, but localized patterns clustering around specific managers and teams. For decades, organizations have treated differential retention outcomes as anecdotal, attributing variations to personality conflicts, team chemistry, or industry specific challenges. Exit interview data arrives too late to inform intervention. Engagement surveys aggregate results to protect confidentiality, but obscure actionable patterns. Performance reviews focus on individual contributors, while leaving managerial effectiveness measurements vague and infrequent. Buckingham and Goodall, 2019. AI enabled people analytics fundamentally disrupts this equilibrium. Machine learning algorithms can now detect subtle patterns across multiple data streams: learning management system engagement, internal mobility applications, communication sentiment analysis, peer network changes, and calendar patterns that signal withdrawal. These systems identify retention risks months before resignation. And more critically, they reveal which managers consistently produce these patterns versus those whose teams demonstrate resilience, growth, and engagement. The practical stakes are substantial. Organizations investing millions in talent acquisition and development face significant losses when preventable attrition concentrates among high performers whose departures could have been addressed through earlier managerial intervention. Beyond financial costs, visible managerial inequity erodes psychological safety, particularly when employees recognize that career outcomes depend more on manager quality than individual merit. Edmondson and Lay, 2014. This article examines the organizational and leadership implications of this transition, offering evidence based frameworks for leaders who choose to use AI enabled transparency as a catalyst for managerial development rather than a punitive enforcement mechanism. The People Analytics Transformation Landscape, defining AI enabled retention intelligence in organizational contexts. Traditional retention analytics relied on lagging indicators: turnover rates calculated quarterly or annually, exit interview themes aggregated across departments, and engagement survey results that often arrived 6 months after data collection. These approaches shared critical limitations, including delayed feedback, aggregation that obscured localized patterns, and dependence on employees voluntarily disclosing concerns they might fear would damage relationships or career prospects. AI enabled people analytics introduces qualitatively different capabilities. Modern systems integrate diverse data sources, including communication patterns, collaboration network analysis, learning platform engagement, internal opportunity applications, performance trajectory changes, and sentiment analysis of workplace communications. Machine learning algorithms identify patterns invisible to human analysts: subtle engagement decline across multiple microsignals, network isolation preceding departure, or learning disengagement that predicts reduced promotion velocity. Critically, these systems can control for confounding variables that traditional analyzes miss. An AI model can distinguish whether retention challenges reflect industry wide compensation pressures, organizational policy gaps, or localized managerial behaviors by comparing outcomes across managers facing similar external conditions. This capability transforms retention from an organizational metric into a managerial performance indicator with unprecedented precision. Current state of practice and adoption drivers. Organizations are deploying these capabilities with varying sophistication and ethical frameworks. Technology firms have developed internal people analytics platforms that predict flight risk and identify organizational network influencers. Financial services firms use algorithms to detect relationship deterioration between employees and managers based on meeting frequency changes, response time patterns, and communication sentiment shifts. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated adoption as remote work eliminated informal observational cues that managers previously relied upon to gauge team well being. Organizations needed systematic approaches to detect disengagement when physical proximity and casual interactions no longer provided early warning signals. Leonardi and Treem, 2020. Several drivers are converging to accelerate this transition. First, generative AI capabilities now enable natural language analysis of communication patterns at scale, detecting sentiment shifts and psychological safety indicators that required manual coding in previous research paradigms. Second, integration platforms increasingly connect disparate systems. HRIS, learning management, performance tools, collaboration platforms, creating unified data environments that enable holistic analysis. Third, competitive pressure for talent has elevated retention from an HR concern to a board level strategic priority, creating executive sponsorship for sophisticated analytics investments. However, adoption remains uneven. Organizations with mature data governance frameworks and cultures of evidence based decision making deploy these tools more successfully than those attempting to overlay analytics on opaque or punitive performance management systems. The technology's capability now exceeds most organizations' governance readiness, creating substantial risks explored in subsequent sections. Organizational and individual consequences of AI enabled managerial visibility. Organizational performance impacts. The business case for addressing localized retention failures is substantial. Research consistently demonstrates that managerial quality represents the primary driver of discretionary effort, with variations in manager effectiveness explaining substantial variance in team engagement scores. Harder et al., 2020. When high quality managers retain talent at notably higher rates than struggling managers within the same organization, the cumulative productivity impact becomes severe. Research suggests that replacing an individual employee costs one half to two times the employee's annual salary when accounting for recruitment, onboarding, lost productivity during vacancy, and the learning curve for new hires. Harder et al., 2020. When these costs concentrate around specific managers, the financial impact compounds rapidly. A manager overseeing a team of 12 who experiences elevated annual turnover, while organizational averages remain moderate, creates substantial annual replacement costs in knowledge worker contexts. Beyond direct costs, localized retention failures create cascading organizational impacts. High performing employees observe these patterns and adjust their internal mobility strategies, avoiding teams or business units known for managerial dysfunction. This selection effect concentrates an organization's strongest talent under its best managers, while struggling managers receive less capable team members, creating self reinforcing quality divergence. Bach, 2015. Innovation suffers particularly when retention problems concentrate in specific areas. Psychological safety research demonstrates that teams experiencing frequent turnover reduce risk taking, knowledge sharing, and creative experimentation, as remaining members adopt defensive postures to protect themselves in unstable environments. Edmondson, 1999. Organizations may invest substantially in innovation initiatives, while localized managerial failures undermine the psychological conditions these initiatives require. Individual well being and career development impacts. For employees, the consequences extend beyond career disruption to fundamental questions of organizational justice and psychological well being. When AI makes visible that career outcomes depend primarily on manager assignment rather than individual merit, it challenges the psychological contract many employees hold regarding fair treatment and advancement opportunity. Rousseau, 1995. Employees working under ineffective managers experience measurable well being deterioration. Research links poor management to increased stress, reduced job satisfaction, higher burnout rates, and physical health consequences. Kuopala et al., 2008. When these outcomes persist because organizations tolerate known managerial failures, employees experience compounded harm. Both the direct impact of poor management and the organizational betrayal of maintaining leaders despite evidence of harm. Career development suffers distinct damage under ineffective managers. Managers serve as gatekeepers for developmental opportunities, stretch assignments, visibility to senior leaders, and sponsorship for advancement. Ibera et al., 2010. Employees assigned to managers who fail to develop talent experience, slower skill acquisition, reduced promotion velocity, and network isolation that persists even after moving to new roles. These developmental deficits compound across careers, creating lasting disadvantage from temporary managerial assignments. The visibility AI creates introduces additional psychological complexity. Employees who recognize through informal channels that their manager represents a retention risk face difficult decisions. Tolerate poor management while seeking internal mobility, exit the organization entirely, or attempt direct confrontation that may damage the relationship further. Each option carries substantial personal and professional risk, particularly in hierarchical cultures where challenging management decisions threatens career prospects. Morrison and Milliken, 2000. Evidence-based organizational responses. Organizations that treat AI-enabled managerial visibility as a developmental opportunity rather than solely an accountability mechanism demonstrate more sustainable improvements in both retention outcomes and managerial capability. The following interventions reflect evidence-based approaches that balance transparency with support. Transparent diagnostic coaching systems. Rather than using AI insights punitively, leading organizations embed them in developmental coaching frameworks that position data as a learning tool. This approach draws on research demonstrating that feedback acceptance depends critically on perceived developmental intent rather than evaluative judgment. London and Smither, 2002. Some organizations have implemented AI-enabled manager development programs that aggregate team engagement signals, retention risk indicators, and development activity patterns into confidential dashboards accessible only to the manager and their coach. These systems flag areas of concern while providing curated resources, peer comparison data to calibrate self-assessment, and structured reflection, prompts that guide managers toward root cause analysis rather than defensive rationalization. The coaching integration proves essential. Managers receive not just data, but interpretation support from trained coaches who help distinguish signal from noise, identify addressable behavioral patterns, and develop specific action plans. Coaches also provide psychological safety for managers to acknowledge struggles without fear of immediate consequences, recognizing that developmental change requires vulnerability that punitive environments suppress. Other organizations have developed platforms that enable managers to receive confidential insights about their team's collaboration patterns, meeting loads, after-hours work habits, and network connectivity. These platforms can implement privacy protections that prevent individual identification while still surfacing meaningful patterns. Managers see that their team demonstrates elevated after-hours, email activity, or reduced cross-team collaboration, but cannot identify specific individuals, creating accountability without surveillance. Effective approaches within diagnostic coaching systems include confidential manager dashboards that provide team-level pattern visibility without individual surveillance capabilities, trained coach assignment rather than self-service analytics, ensuring interpretation support and developmental framing, peer benchmarking with anonymized comparison groups that help managers calibrate whether observed patterns represent areas for development, structured reflection protocols that guide managers through root cause analysis before action planning, Resource libraries curated to specific patterns detected, connecting managers directly to relevant skill building content. Follow up accountability structures, where coaches check progress on commitments without creating punitive escalation for managers showing genuine developmental effort. Capability building investments targeting root causes. AI enabled insights can reveal common capability gaps that predict retention failures, enabling organizations to invest in skill development targeting these specific deficits. Research on managerial effectiveness identifies several high impact capability domains that AI systems can measure through behavioral proxies. Campion et al., 2020. Psychological safety creation represents one critical capability. Managers who consistently produce retention challenges often demonstrate behavioral patterns indicating low psychological safety. Limited team meeting time dedicated to open discussion, communication that flows primarily one directional from manager to team, rapid closure on ideas without exploration, and blame attribution during setbacks. Edmondson and Lay, 2014. AI systems can detect these patterns through meeting analytics, communication network analysis, and sentiment analysis of written exchanges. Some organizations have addressed this systematically by identifying psychological safety as a primary driver of team effectiveness, then building development programs teaching specific behaviors, including structured turn taking in meetings, asking generative questions before offering solutions, and demonstrating fallibility through acknowledging own mistakes. Managers receive coaching on these microbehaviors, accompanied by measurement showing impact on team communication patterns and engagement indicators. Development planning and feedback delivery represent another common capability gap. Managers struggling with retention often provide infrequent, vague feedback that fails to guide employee development, while simultaneously holding high performance expectations employees feel unprepared to meet. London and Smither, 2002. AI systems can detect this pattern when employees report low development satisfaction, show minimal skill progression in learning platforms, and demonstrate reduced internal mobility success rates despite tenure. Progressive organizations have developed manager development programs specifically targeting this capability gap, teaching structured frameworks for developmental conversations, regular feedback cadences, and career progression mapping. These programs emphasize practice through role play, video self review, and coached application rather than conceptual training alone. Managers receive follow up measurement showing whether their team's development satisfaction and skill acquisition patterns improve following program participation. Effective capability building approaches include behaviorally specific skill development targeting observed gaps rather than generic leadership training. Practice based learning architectures incorporating simulation, role play, video review, and coached application. Measurement integration showing managers the connection between capability development and team outcomes. Peer learning cohorts that reduce isolation and create safe environments for managers to acknowledge struggles. Micro learning resources aligned to specific behavioral patterns detected, enabling just in time skill building when managers encounter challenging situations. Executive sponsorship that positions managerial development as strategic priority rather than remedial intervention. Procedural justice in performance management integration. When AI reveals consistent managerial underperformance, organizations face difficult decisions about accountability. Procedural justice research demonstrates that perceived fairness of the accountability process matters as much as substantive outcomes for maintaining organizational trust. Colquitt et al., 2001. Fair process requires several elements. First, adequate notice that managerial retention outcomes will be measured and carry consequences, avoiding retrospective standard application. Second, evidence quality assurance ensuring data accuracy and appropriate interpretation rather than algorithmic artifacts or confounding variables. Third, voice and explanation opportunity for managers to provide context, acknowledge challenges, and demonstrate change commitment. Fourth, consistency in how standards apply across organizational levels and functions. Brockner and Wiesenfeld, 1996. Leading organizations have implemented structured performance management protocols when their people analytics revealed significant managerial variation in retention outcomes. Rather than immediate termination for underperforming managers, they created tiered response frameworks. Initial interventions focus on coaching and capability building, with clear metrics for improvement. Managers showing genuine developmental effort but slower progress receive extended support timeframes. Only managers demonstrating sustained underperformance despite support or unwillingness to acknowledge concerns and engage development resources face employment consequences. Some organizations have also created appeal mechanisms where managers can challenge data interpretation, request alternative measurement approaches, or argue that confounding factors beyond their control explain observed patterns. Independent review panels evaluate these cases, preventing direct supervisors from serving as sole arbiters of consequences. This procedural safeguard increases manager willingness to engage development honestly rather than defensively manipulating metrics. Greenberg, 1990. Effective procedural justice approaches include clear standard communication before measurement begins, ensuring managers understand expectations and measurement approaches. Tiered intervention frameworks that escalate gradually based on manager response rather than immediately applying maximum consequences. Evidence review processes that verify data quality and rule out confounding factors before attributing outcomes to managerial behavior. Voice mechanisms including structured conversations where managers explain context and demonstrate improvement commitment. Independent review panels for contested cases, preventing supervisory conflicts of interest in accountability decisions. Consistency monitoring across organizational levels, ensuring senior leaders face equivalent scrutiny for retention outcomes in their domains. Structural and operating model adjustments. Some retention patterns reflect not individual managerial capability, but structural conditions that set managers up for failure. AI analytics can reveal when retention challenges concentrate in specific roles, geographies, or business models, regardless of manager identity, indicating systemic rather than individual issues. Pfeffer, 1998. Span of control represents one common structural challenge. Research demonstrates that managers overseeing excessively large teams, particularly in knowledge work contexts requiring individualized development, struggle to provide adequate attention, resulting in engagement decline and retention challenges. Meyer and Boat, 2003. When AI reveals that retention problems concentrate among managers with teams exceeding certain size thresholds, the intervention may require structural reorganization rather than manager replacement. Some organizations have addressed this systematically after their analytics revealed that retention challenges concentrated among managers with large teams in roles requiring intensive development and client relationship management. Rather than attributing failures to individual managers, they restructured many teams, added team leads reporting to senior managers, and adjusted project staffing models to reduce individual manager span. Role ambiguity represents another structural contributor. Managers given accountability for retention, but lacking authority over key drivers. Compensation decisions controlled centrally, promotion processes opaque to managers, development budgets allocated without manager input. Predictably struggle regardless of capability. AI systems can detect this pattern when retention challenges correlate with structural position rather than manager tenure, identity, or capability indicators. Organizations have discovered through people analytics that retention challenges sometimes concentrate among mid-level managers in matrix structures, where authority is distributed across functional and geographic reporting lines. These managers hold accountability for engagement, but lack decision-making authority over most factors employees cite as retention drivers. Forward-thinking organizations respond by clarifying decision rights, delegating compensation discretion within ranges to frontline managers, and creating transparent processes where managers can advocate for their team members in promotion and development decisions. Effective structural approaches include span of control analysis, identifying whether retention challenges correlate with team size thresholds requiring reorganization. Authority accountability alignment, audits ensuring managers have decision rights matching their retention responsibilities. Resource allocation, reviews examining whether managers struggling with retention have equitable access to development budgets, compensation adjustment capacity, and advancement opportunities for team members. Role design assessments, evaluating whether certain managerial positions face structural challenges that predict retention, struggles regardless of individual capability. Organizational redesign pilots testing alternative structures in areas showing persistent retention challenges despite manager development investments. Technology and data governance frameworks. The effectiveness and ethics of AI enabled managerial accountability depend critically on robust data governance. Organizations must balance measurement precision with privacy protection, algorithmic transparency with proprietary capability, and accountability with psychological safety. Data minimization represents a foundational principle. Organizations should collect and analyze only data demonstrably relevant to retention prediction and managerial development, resisting expansive surveillance that erodes trust and psychological safety. Some workplace analytics platforms include built in privacy protections that prevent analysis of groups smaller than certain thresholds, suppress individual identification, and provide employees transparency about what data is collected and how it is used. Algorithmic transparency enables managers to understand what behaviors and patterns drive their evaluations, supporting learning and behavioral adjustment. Black box systems that render verdicts without explanation undermine both procedural justice and developmental value. Several organizations now provide managers access to explanations showing which specific patterns most influence their retention assessments, enabling targeted behavioral change. Leading organizations have developed explainable AI capabilities within their talent management platforms, enabling managers to see that their retention assessment reflects factors like low one on one meeting frequency, delayed response times to employee messages, or uneven distribution of developmental assignments across team members. This specificity transforms abstract scores into actionable developmental priorities. Consent and opt out mechanisms represent another governance consideration. While organizations have legitimate interests in measuring managerial effectiveness, individual employees may prefer that their data not contribute to these analyses. Some organizations provide employees options to exclude their data from managerial assessments while still receiving organizational development opportunities, respecting autonomy while acknowledging reduced measurement precision. Effective governance approaches include data minimization policies limiting collection to demonstrably relevant indicators rather than comprehensive surveillance. Algorithmic transparency requirements ensuring managers understand what patterns drive their assessments. Privacy protection standards including de-identification thresholds, aggregation requirements, and limitations on individual level data access. Employee notification protocols providing transparency about what data is collected and how it is used in managerial assessments. Independent ethics review boards evaluating algorithmic fairness, potential bias, and appropriate use cases. Regular algorithmic audits examining weather models produce disparate impacts across protected demographic categories or other concerning patterns. Building long term organizational resilience and leadership development capability. Cultural transformation toward learning orientation. Sustainable implementation of AI enabled managerial accountability requires fundamental cultural evolution from evaluative to developmental mindsets. Organizations where managers perceive measurement as threatening rather than supportive will encounter resistance, defensive behaviors, and metric gaming that undermines both measurement validity and developmental impact. Edmondson, 2018. Learning orientation cultures normalize struggle and position development as universal rather than remedial. Leaders across levels model vulnerability by discussing their own developmental areas, sharing how they have responded to feedback, and framing measurement as supporting excellence rather than enforcing minimums. Dweck, 2006. Cultural transformations at leading technology companies illustrate this principle. When senior leaders explicitly shift organizational values toward growth mindset, learning, and collaborative development, this cultural foundation enables successful deployment of people analytics capabilities that might trigger defensiveness in more fixed mindset cultures. Managers in these environments discuss team analytics insights openly, share developmental strategies, and view measurement as supporting their development ambitions rather than threatening their positions. Approaches for cultivating learning orientation include executive vulnerability modeling, where senior leaders discuss their developmental areas and how they use data to improve. Celebration of improvement trajectories rather than solely recognizing managers who start from strong positions. Language and framing consistency, emphasizing development, growth, and excellence support rather than deficit identification. Psychological safety building, enabling managers to acknowledge challenges without fear of immediate consequences. Peer learning infrastructure creating communities where managers share struggles and effective practices. Reframing failure narratives, positioning retention challenges as information for improvement rather than character judgments. Distributed leadership development systems. Traditional leadership development concentrates investment in high potential individuals identified through opaque processes. AI enabled insights enable more distributed development targeting all managers based on their specific patterns and needs, democratizing capability building investment. Day et al., 2014. This approach recognizes that effective frontline management matters for organizational performance, regardless of whether specific managers will reach executive levels. Organizations benefit substantially from improving the median manager, not just developing the exceptional few who will advance to senior leadership. Modern people analytics enable even more targeted distribution of development resources. Rather than generic programs applied uniformly, organizations can provide customized development addressing specific capability gaps AI systems identify. Managers showing psychological safety deficits receive focused coaching on that dimension. Those struggling with career development conversations receive targeted training in that domain. Approaches for distributed development include universal development access rather than selective high potential programs, ensuring all managers receive capability support. Customized learning pathways aligned to specific patterns and gaps AI systems identify for individual managers. Near peer coaching networks connecting managers facing similar challenges for mutual support and learning. Just in time microlearning delivered when specific situational challenges arise rather than abstract advanced training. Manager community investments, creating ongoing learning environments rather than episodic training events. Development accountability, integrated into managerial performance expectations, signaling organizational commitment. Continuous measurement and iteration frameworks. AI enabled measurement creates opportunities for continuous improvement cycles rather than annual performance reviews. Organizations can detect emerging retention concerns weeks or months after they develop, rather than discovering problems only through exit interviews conducted after damage is complete. This capability enables fundamentally different intervention timing. Instead of waiting for annual engagement surveys, organizations can provide managers real time feedback when team patterns suggest declining engagement, enabling immediate course correction. Instead of learning about development gaps when employees resign, managers receive ongoing measurement showing whether team members are building capabilities and progressing. Some organizations have moved away from annual performance reviews in favor of ongoing check in conversations, supported by continuous feedback technology and people analytics that surface emerging concerns requiring managerial attention. These systems enable faster intervention when problems develop while reducing the stakes of any single measurement point. Managers can recover from temporary struggles through sustained improvement rather than being defined by annual snapshot evaluations. Approaches for continuous measurement include real-time dashboards providing ongoing visibility into team patterns rather than delayed annual reports. Trend analysis focus examining trajectory changes rather than single-point measurements. Early warning systems alerting managers and coaches when concerning patterns emerge, enabling proactive intervention. Rapid experimentation protocols allowing managers to test different approaches and observe impact on team indicators. Longitudinal tracking, following manager development across time to assess whether capability building produces sustained improvement. Feedback loop closure, ensuring managers see connections between behavioral changes and team outcome improvements. Conclusion: AI enabled people analytics will make visible what many organizations have long known informally. Retention is not primarily a systemic challenge, but a localized pattern clustering around specific managers. This visibility creates both threat and opportunity. Organizations that respond punitively, using transparency to identify and remove underperforming managers without addressing capability gaps or structural conditions, will struggle with defensive cultures, metric gaming, and persistent management quality problems as new managers repeat patterns their predecessors demonstrated. Organizations that respond developmentally, using transparency to guide coaching, target capability building, ensure procedural justice, address structural barriers, and govern data responsibly, can transform retention from a lagging HR metric into a dynamic leadership development signal. These organizations will build competitive advantage through superior management capability at scale, not just exceptional leadership in select positions. The transition requires cultural courage. Leaders must acknowledge that many organizations have tolerated known managerial failures for years, valuing technical expertise or political relationships over people development capability. They must invest in coaching infrastructure, development programs, and governance systems before deploying sophisticated analytics. They must model vulnerability by discussing how their own teams and leadership approaches appear in these data systems. Most critically, leaders must decide whether AI enabled visibility serves primarily to protect the organization through identifying problems, or to develop the organization through building capabilities. The former approach produces compliance and defensiveness, the latter produces learning and improvement. Organizations that embrace the developmental possibility will emerge from this transition with stronger management, better retention, and sustainable competitive advantage built on human capability rather than technological sophistication alone. The bar for effective management will rise as AI makes previously hidden patterns visible. Organizations can prepare their managers for this higher standard through support, development, and fair process. Or they can wait until transparency forces reactive responses to retention crises they could have prevented. The technology will arrive regardless. The question is whether organizations use it to judge their managers or to develop them.